mystical, so unpredictable, here on the SNL Network.
Yes, so welcome on in, everybody, to the Saturday Night Network for a very fun beginning to our new summer podcast series, and that is the Saturday Night Network Impression Countdown. This is something that we did last year with characters, and it was so much fun to get to see all of our listeners guess which characters made the top 20 as we counted them down from 20 to 1. And, you know, we did the same thing this year. Last week, we put out a poll on Instagram and on Twitter asking you what your favorite impressions are in the history of Saturday Night Live. And so many people came in with different impressions from every era of the show. We tallied all the results, and now we have our top 20 that we will reveal week by week here for the next few Monday nights. And this is a very fun podcast that we get to do with our patrons, our biggest supporters of the Saturday Night Network. So if you are interested in joining us and podcasting on this series, definitely let us know. Join us at patreon.com/the SNL Network. But let me introduce our patrons that we have here tonight. And first up is my man, Fred. So Fred, how are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. Excited to be here. Some good names coming up.
Yes, for sure. That is part of the fun of the show, is that we're not going to tease you, before we do this live. We'll keep a silhouette thumbnail up so you can see maybe who the impressions are, but you have to listen to the show to find out, and then we'll switch it up after a few days and put them out there. And joining us as well, all the way from across the pond, it is Lewis. Lewis, how you doing?
I'm doing really great. Really happy to be on the show today.
Yeah, great to have you both here with us. So let's dive right in. We're going to reveal the 4 impressions, 20, 19, 18, and 17, in just a moment. But first, let me ask you both, to you, what makes a great SNL impression? Because, the criteria might be different for everybody, but it's, I'm always curious when the people come on, why a certain impression works for people versus others. So Fred, let me start with you on that one.
Yeah, so I feel like historically, the most fun I've ever had with impressions have been where, yes, it has to kind of sound like them, and yes, they sort of have to look like the person as well, but it's number one for me, like mannerisms, like facial expressions, mannerisms, like the way they act. That's a big one. And then I do know, like, sometimes also, like, the ones that have really stood out have also been the ones that where they kind of take this, like, one thing about the person and really blow it up. Right. So like credit is due for those that sound and act just like a person. But what makes it truly satire is where you take like some aspect of them, their personality, or what they believe in, and then like really dive into that. Otherwise, it's a bit too much acting.
For sure. I mean, going back to the beginnings of the show, when people were impersonated on the show, it was always a question of like, well, this doesn't really exactly sound like the person. So is this a good impression or not? And then the question became like, why does it work if it's not exactly like that person? And it is because ultimately, there is some characterization of the impressions that were, stuck to by the audience and ended up clicking with everybody. So Lewis, would love to know from you, what makes a great SNL impression to you?
Something I really find really fun to discuss about SNL is the opportunities SNL has. That's something I've kind of spoken about on my times here before. And what I do really love when SNL does with impressions is the kind of characterizations, the interpretations, and how kind of reflecting how the world sees a certain person and kind of bringing that into impression to bring about that kind of sense of relatability that makes you more attached to the impression rather than the person, and in a way that like the impression becomes this character in and of itself that even if you don't know the original person. I think that's something that makes a really great impression in general, is if I don't know the person they're impersonating and never heard of them, if I can still laugh at their impression, then I think they're doing something really great, and that shows just a lot of really good comedic potential and acting potential and skill. But there's another level of fun, of accuracy, when someone is able to do such a good representation and impersonation of someone else to like every specific mannerism, their flow, their exact manner of speech. That's also really fun to see, and I think they both work really well in their own right. And I think the ones we're discussing today, there's a bit of a mix in both of those, of the more characterization ones, the interpretations, and the direct nailing it down to a specific level impressions.
Yeah.
Totally makes
So-
sense. Go ahead, Fred.
No, like to Lewis's point, like I couldn't agree more. Like it should be funny 40 years from now also. It's kind of like how like when you like now that I'm older, like I'll watch Disney films and like there'll be jokes in there for the parents. Like it should be something that's like a bit timeless. So I agree. Like even if you don't know who like XYZ is, it should still be funny, not just accurate. So I think Lewis made some great points.
Totally agree. I am very curious as we get through each of these impressions and reveal them to you, what categories we start to develop. Is this an impression that really worked because it was so specific, like the SNL cast member caught on to something and that's what worked? Or is it just so ridiculous, a heightened version of that actual person in real life, and that's why it worked? So we'll talk about why each of these impressions, at least why we think they clicked with the audience. All right. Anything else before we get started, or are we ready to reveal number 20 on the list? Okay, let's do it. All right, let's start with number 20, and this will kick off our impression countdown. And I got some sound clips here, so first time using the soundboard in a while. Here we go, number 20 on the list.
Because Joe Biden is better than that. I repeat, Joe Biden is better than that.
You guys got that?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So perfect. Just wanted to make sure the soundboard was working. But yeah, that is Joe Biden, but not the current impression of Joe Biden done by the great James Austin Johnson. The Jason Sudeikis version of Joe Biden comes in at number 20 here on the countdown. This impression was done 27 times between 2007 leading up to that 2008 election and 2021. The last time we saw it was when Jason hosted in season 47, and that was brought in as the voice of Biden past. So, I'd love to get your thoughts on these impressions. Lewis, I'll start with you on this one. What do you think about Jason Sudeikis' impression of Joe Biden, and why did it crack the top 20?
My relationship with this impression is something clicked for me. I watched a couple of the cold opens leading up to today, and the cold opens where it's just him directly speaking to the camera for up to 9 minutes. They're good. They're good. Jason Sudeikis is just a very talented performer. The jokes they give him are very good, but it doesn't sound like Joseph Biden at all. I have to use his full name, but it doesn't sound like Joe Biden, like the one we're kind of seeing now. And it clicked for me when I watched obviously the JJ and Jason Sudeikis one. There's a cold open with Taron Killam where he plays, I think it's Paul Ryan, where they're doing the vice presidential debate. And when Jason Sudeikis' Joe Biden is interacting with other politicians or just other people in general, it is phenomenal. I think Jason Sudeikis just has such great chemistry with everyone he works with, and the repertoire he gives, and like you see how it represents how Joe Biden was kind of perceived in a comedic manner around that time compared to now. And I think it lets a lot of Jason Sudeikis' strengths come out. Like I said, he sounds nothing like him, but he's getting a couple of the random things Biden says that are kind of like, it's like, oh wow, I wouldn't expect a politician to say that. And I think that really works for a lot of people. It's not the first time we've seen that, obviously. It's difficult to be so innovative with an impression of a vice president after the show that had been going for like over 30 years at that point. But I think Jason Sudeikis is able to do it really well. And I think it shines even brighter in those specific circumstances when it's interacting with other people. That's why I think it's like just cracking top 20. It's very memorable for a lot of people, I think, of the time. It's one that people still talk about quite a bit, which is interesting because a lot of time when there's a current impression, you never really see people bring up the old impressions. But I think we're seeing that now because it is such a different take than JJ's. I'm interested to see if JJ's Biden is on the list at any point, but it's very different. And I think that's something I really like about SNL impressions is how different approaches they can take.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily extremely accurate in the way that JAJs are, but there is definitely a characterization here of Joe Biden as far as Sudeikis's interpretation of, like, what is Joe Biden in terms of everybody's eyes, like how do they view him at the time. And I think he came across as if he was like very bro-y. I think, like there's a lot of like bro humor we get from that version of Biden, which could not be more different from JAJ's Biden now. So Fred, what about you? What do you think of the impression? Why do you think it cracked the top 20?
I actually thought this would be higher up, but I'm curious to see what's in the other 19. I'd say, like, to Lewis's point, that yeah, like it's not a very accurate impression, almost to the point that he's not even trying to like act like Joe Biden sometimes, right? Like he's not doing anything with his eyes, a little bit, like a little squintier maybe, or something, that like he just like kind of owns it. Like he's like, I've decided on this and I'm gonna go with this. And it does help that Jason Sudeikis is just so charming. Like I feel like even his resting face, he's kind of barely smiling, like his eyes and like his mouth, right? Like he just always seems like pleasant. He's having a good time. And yeah, like I mean, I think like back to like what we were saying before, basically like with this Biden, they got to basically be like, okay, he's kind of, I mean, I guess it's because like Fred Armisen's Obama wasn't entirely memorable.
Right.
And they couldn't really do much with him because like Obama's just like awesome, and it's not that Obama himself is funny, but there's nothing to like point at and be like, that's funny about Obama. So, or to some people. And so I think this contrast, like, yeah, like what you were saying with like the bro humor thing that they were going for, like he was like kind of like the fun, like uncle, great uncle, like whippersnapper, that sort of thing, was just like a very fun take on it. And it's obviously like something, it's not like J can't achieve that. It's just like all of us, like when time passes, we age, and that contrast has changed, right? Like he's no longer the VP, like, right? They poke fun of like the role of being VP, but like once you're like president, you're not there. There isn't that kind of like side by side. So like I think it's just so much fun. I loved rewatching these. Like I remember liking them then, and it was awesome to rewatch.
I have to wonder if the fondness for this impression, at least now, because I don't think it was looked upon poorly at the time, but I think people really love this impression now. And I think it's partially because people, almost wish that the current Biden was maybe more like the Sudeikis Biden in a way. Like now that we get to see JJ's version of Biden, and it's so subdued and like old, like I guess that, old man, he plays it like somewhat senile. It's like a much more boring version of Joe Biden, whereas Sudeikis is like the fun party guy, who maybe takes it a little bit overboard. And I think that's, part of the fun of the impression. Like, listen to this.
Don't worry, homies. Big Daddy Joe's got your back.
Like that's the type of thing that you would never hear from a JJ Biden impression. And again, like I have to feel like the JJ Biden impression is more of the accurate impression, but the better SNL impression is probably Sudeikis's Biden. So if you go back to that season 47 sketch and getting to see them together, it's like Sudeikis brings the energy to the room in a way that JJ's Biden never could. So to me, like this totally makes sense as being like a fun top 20 impression. Lewis, anything else on the impression that we didn't get to cover?
Yeah, I think it is a very fun one. It's not, at the time, I don't think it was too rare to see political impressions that were purely fun. That's something we lost a lot in, I'd say, the 2017 2016 kind of Trump era, is they were so concerned with going, we don't like this politician. For most politicians, SNL's never been like afraid to poke fun at any side, but we never got an impression where it's like they're not trying to say Joe Biden. They will say that in regards to some things, that like Joe Biden is like completely incompetent or has a bad opinion, but it doesn't feel like they're doing it because they want people to know that they think that. It feels like they're doing that because they genuinely think it's funny. And that's something that I think this era was very good at in regards to politics, that we don't see. We're seeing it a little bit more now recently, I think, but there was a period of time, 2016, 2017, where the political impressions weren't that fun, and I think Jason Sudeikis' one is one that really is. He was never brought too much into like big group impressions, to my knowledge. I could be completely wrong about that. But a lot of time they did just do a cold open of Joe Biden talking. And I think that's pretty fun for a lot of people. And it's not something that you kind of groan at when a cold open starts. And I think that's kind of an important thing that kind of makes this position make a lot of sense.
Fred, through your research on this impression, were there specific sketches that if somebody does not remember this impression too much that you would recommend they go back and check out?
Yeah, I mean, I think like his debate with Sarah Palin is pretty epic. And like some would argue maybe started, for better or for worse, like this explosion of political impressions. Like, of course, SNL's always had them, but did every cold open, did every episode have to always have them? I don't want to misspeak, but I think they certainly did not. And I think it was after this that, because even like after like Will Ferrell's like wildly famous Bush, right, or Daryl Hammond's Gore, like I feel like it, and those are way more popular, I think, than like what we're talking about right now.
We'll see if they make the list.
We'll see if they make the list. But this really started that trend. And that's something that it's also like incredibly hilarious. And like, I mean, I know we're talking about Sudeikis, but I think Sarah Palin's incredible. And I think Tina Fey's incredible in that. So I think like that's probably like the most important one. And it's a long one too. It's a big one. I'd recommend that one.
Lewis, any other recommendations you would say to everybody listening?
I really like the Taron Killam one where he plays where Taron Killam's Paul Ryan and Jason Sudeikis is Joe Biden. That one's really fun because the whole bit of like Joe Biden's like, no one's gonna watch this, so we can have fun, and he's just like cracking jokes every 2 seconds and like completely going off topic. It's very fun, and you forget that it's, you know, about a serious topic like a vice presidential debate.
Yeah, so that sketch with Taron Killam is October 13th, 2012, and that is season 38, episode 4. And the one with Sarah Palin, played by Tina Fey, is October 4th, 2008. That's season 34, episode 4. So if you did want to go back and check those out. But like I said, he played Joe Biden 27 times. That's a lot. So, you know, compared to some other people. Other impressions of Joe Biden, Kevin Nealon, Woody Harrelson a few times. John Mulaney, if you remember that, did Joe Biden once. Of course, Jim Carrey's Joe Biden, a very famous part of season 46. We got to cover that. Alex Moffat popped in as Joe Biden for a little bit, and then James Austin Johnson as well. And yeah, Pete Davidson randomly played Joe Biden in a sketch last season as well, if you remember that.
And I think the Alex Moffat one's worth mentioning because I think that I'm sure like 70% of people were like, "What's happening here?" And they didn't. It was funny just because it's funny, but that was great for us, I think, having Alex Moffat pop in.
Yeah, and I'll say, look, again, just to go back to, you know, anybody listening who's like, they really like JJ's Biden. I mean, that's great. I do think that he plays a good Biden. I think he's playing the version of Biden that exists now, but I bet JJ would love to have gotten to play the Biden that was the Biden when he was VP. So I could see why that version of Joe Biden made the list, at least for now. We'll see what comes up down the road. But anything else on number 20, or should we head over to number 19? All right, let's do it. Let's reveal number 19 on the list. And this is an oldie but a goodie. And here is number 19.
I am dark and you are light.
You are blind as a bat, and I have sight.
Yeah, which one? Well, this time we're going to talk about Joe Piscopo's Frank Sinatra. I didn't mean to mislead there, but I just want to make sure, you know, we're going to talk about Joe's Frank Sinatra, which was played 12 times and then again at the 40th from, he played 12 times from 1981 to 1984. And yeah, this was a very fun impression. A lot of people will remember a Frank Sinatra impression from Phil Hartman, but it is Joe Piscopo's Frank Sinatra that got voted here at number 19. Obviously, Frank Sinatra, like a huge part of the culture at the time. And just, this was a huge impression in an era that really needed some big characters and big impressions. And this is probably one of the things, or the thing, that Joe Piscopo is best known for on SNL is his impression of Frank Sinatra. So, Fred, what do you think about this impression and it making the list here at number 19?
I expected to see this. It was super popular. I am shocked that you said he played him like 8-9 times.
Yeah, what did I say? This
Only
was
because
12 times. 12 times.
at least on YouTube, it was like a little hard to find more than like 3 sketches of his. I'm not sure why. But I do know you played him a lot, and like it was his most popular character. So it's great that these are back to back, because I'd say this is kind of like the opposite end of the spectrum. Like I like Joe Piscopo, and I think this is a good impression, but it's not quite as fun. Like the impression itself is not fun. It's almost like kind of the edgy racial jokes that he makes are what makes it fun, right? And it is extremely accurate, but it's not as fun to watch, let's say, him do it, at least in my personal opinion, than it was and I went in order, right? Like after like watching Sudeikis' Biden, but this obviously has a place there. And I think like, especially in the early 80s, Frank Sinatra was even much more top of mind and much more of recent memory, right? So like, I think like reached like a much wider audience. And then also like that Stevie Wonder is incredible.
Yeah.
And they were like the two most, and I think from that era, right? Like they were the two superstars. So that only helped. And I'm sure this helped that, or like what came first, but I definitely expected to see this.
Yeah, I think that like during that 5-year period, there's not a lot of things that like transcended beyond Eddie Murphy and the stuff he did on the show. And I think like one of those things, like if you had to think of a handful of things that are not Eddie Murphy from that era that really like people nowadays can think of, it is probably Joe Piscopo's Frank Sinatra impression. And I think doing it at the 40th anniversary had a big role in people remembering it and being like, oh yeah, and looking it up on YouTube and then perhaps voting it in this poll. I was actually pretty surprised that it cracked the top 20 here, but it just got in here at number 19. Lewis, what are your thoughts on the impression and its role on the list?
I really enjoyed it. This is one of the impressions that as the countdown goes on, I will have to do a lot more of this. I didn't really know what Frank Sinatra talked like. I love Frank Sinatra's music, but not being around in the 80s or being in America in the 80s or before that. I never heard him speak before. And it was interesting. The way I did a lot of these was I went and watched Joe Piscopo's Frank Sinatra. Then I would watch actual Frank Sinatra talking. And I was shocked at how much he like really nailed a lot of the mannerisms in when he's like changing topic or the flow of his voice. I think that's something that a lot of the impressions here have done really well, is nailing down the flow of someone's voice. It goes such a long way to making an impression memorable and work and accurate. He gets everything right. It's kind of the classic New Yorker guy who's kind of old, but he still thinks he's really cool and thinks he's really slick and knows who he is. So not only is he impersonating Frank Sinatra, he's impersonating that kind of character. And I think a lot of people, especially SNL viewers, really enjoy that kind of thing. And correct me if I'm wrong, but did he do this one in season 6?
He did do this one in season 6, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, he did.
Yeah, because only him and Eddie stayed on after 6.
Yeah, he did it 3 times in season 6, including including this sketch, which is from the last episode in season 6, all about American cars.
This is Francis Albert reminding you that it is time. It's time that for all of us to start buying and driving American cars.
Yeah. This was one of those things that like really, came out of that season, Lewis.
Yeah, I think it is very important for a lot of newcomer SNL cast members to get something that works. And I think there's another impression that we were talking about today that I think is relevant there. But that car drive sketch is very funny. It tells me a lot about like perception of Frank Sinatra at the time, which I think is really interesting for an impression to do, is hold not historical importance, but give a bit of a window into how he was kind of viewed, how he kind of came across, the kind of stuff he'd do. And I think that's really fun and really interesting to look back on.
Now, if I was making my own list, I would probably put Phil Hartman's version of Frank Sinatra above this impression. But I do understand why the Joe Piscopo one was voted above it, because, unfortunately, We haven't seen Phil Hartman's version of this, in modern times, naturally, with Phil not being around anymore. I think he did do it a couple times when he hosted, but it had Phil stayed around. And the belief is that Phil would have hosted like a million times because he was just like, he's like, the GOAT, right? And, had he come back, I think he would have kept doing this impression, and this would have been like his thing. And I don't think anybody would remember the Piscopo Sinatra impression beyond maybe the Stevie Wonder sketch. But I think that, naturally, as people stopped hearing as much about Phil Hartman in modern times, at least younger people, something like Joe Piscopo's Frank Sinatra seemed to permeate the culture. And I bet if you ask like casual SNL fans, like, who's Joe Piscopo and what do you know about him? I don't know that they would know much more than this Frank Sinatra impression. Like, I think this is his thing on the show. So Fred, in your research on the impression, were there any other recommendations or things about it that you think would be important that the listeners should know?
I think the listeners should know, first of all, Frank Sinatra's a Jersey boy. He's not from New York.
I didn't.
As am I. So no, but I agree with you on the Phil Hartman bit. And again, like back to like what we keep, and it's going to keep coming up, like Phil Hartman.
I was going to say, Piscopo's from Jersey also, right? So that they go hand in hand.
Yes, they both are. Yeah. So like, so like what you were saying before, like I agree. Like I liked Hartman's more as well, and like it just had like a bit more pop or pep to it. And like I think this is going to keep coming up, but like Piscopo's is like dead on, like super accurate. So I mean that's hard to fight. And then I do like it's not very rational, but a part of me is because like the Ebersol era is not very represented, but like it's obviously there. A part of me is like biased that there's at least like a little bit of representation on this list. So I'm supportive of this. Definitely.
Lewis, any last words on this Joe Piscopo, Frank Sinatra impression?
Check out the car drive sketch. I think that one's just a very funny sketch overall. And there's a video I saw when looking at it where I think Frank Sinatra actually introduced is Joe Piscopo on Gold. Joe Piscopo does a song in kind of Frank Sinatra style, if I'm remembering correctly. That's a really interesting thing to see. I like it when people that impressionists get kind of acclaimed by the people they're doing impression of.
Yeah, definitely. And I have to wonder if at the 50th we may see this one again. So that'll be something to watch for. Okay, so 2 impressions down tonight. We're going to reveal number 18 and 17 coming up in a little bit. But first, let me thank our sponsor for tonight's podcast, and that is the Just for Laughs Comedy Festival up here in Montreal. Fred, have you heard of the Just for Laughs Comedy Festival?
I have. I've actually always wanted to go.
Okay.
I've heard great things. I know it's like one of the biggest comedy festivals in North America, maybe the biggest, right?
Yeah, for sure. Lewis, what about you? Have you heard of this festival?
I have heard. I listened to the coverage you did of it last year, and I think that'd be really cool to go to, but a bit far away from me.
Well, I hope you can make it one day, and there's still opportunities if you're a listener and you do want to come up to Montreal for this year's Just for Laughs Festival, where there is so much comedy all the time, starting next week. Well, really, there's a few shows starting this week, but it really kicks off next week with comedy all night, all day, every day, basically, where they have shows at all of the local comedy clubs. Some really big names are coming in. We already spoke last week about how Leslie Jones will be here. Please Don't Destroy will be doing a couple of shows while they're here if you want to look at that stuff. This week, I found out that Chris Redd's coming up, Jay Farrow's coming up, Sashir Zameda will be here as well. So lots of SNL alumni that will be here for the Just for Laughs Comedy Festival, including some former writers and I'm sure SNL producers who are scouting for new talent for 49 and 50. So if you wanted to come up here just hanging out, the streets are blocked off. You got to walk around. You got to go to all the different comedy clubs. We encourage you to do so because it is so much fun. And I'm proud that in my city in Montreal, we do have the biggest comedy festival in the world. So you got to come join us and hit me up when you come here. So you can get your tickets at montreal.hahaha.com for tickets to the Just for Laughs Comedy Festival. All right, gentlemen, ready to get to number 18? Let's do it. All right. Yeah. This is a very fun impression. One of my honestly, one of my favorite sketches that I get to see, always gives me a good laugh. And I'll play you a bit of one of those sketches right now where you get to hear this impression.
I'm Martha Stewart. Thanksgiving. It's not just a day for turkey and dressing. This traditional American holiday commemorates the autumn feast when our pilgrim forefathers and the nearby savages put an end to their vicious fighting.
Yeah, that's a Martha Stewart's Thanksgiving special. A lot of people remember the topless version of that. But yeah, from 1996 to 2004, Anna Gasteyer played Martha Stewart 13 times on Saturday Night Live. And yeah, this was a really fun impression, often replayed in the specials, and just so interesting because, you know, a lot of these impressions that we talked about tonight, the Biden, the Sinatra, the Martha Stewart, so isolated on their own, you know, like they could play off of people, but really like this is an impression that mostly was just, you know, Martha Stewart directly to camera, doing a version of her, and Anna Gasteyer just being you know, she's so charismatic as a performer, but just being so like deadpanned and monotone in the way that she did it. And I think that contrast was so interesting to me. So I'd love to talk about this impression. Fred, I'm going to start with you on this one. What do you think about the Anna Gasteyer's Martha Stewart impression?
I love it, but I love Anna Gasteyer. And I think that, like, yeah, you mentioned something I was going to bring up, that this was a time when they were okay with one person. They were never that long, the sketches, but like one person staring at the camera and it's just like she or he. I feel like those days are gone. Did J.J. have a sketch like that this season? Just like one sketch where it was just him, basically?
I don't think so. Like there was a lot of times where he would come out. Oh, go ahead, Lucy. You have something?
Chloe Feynman kind of did with the Jennifer Coolidge looking at Christmas stuff. There was other people in that, but she was never. It was really weird seeing like a minute 42 long sketch. But yeah.
Okay.
Continue, John. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was times where he would come out as Trump and then like start things off, like talking about like his new CD that he's putting together, and then you would cut to all of the people, as opposed to like, whereas in times, you know, I guess in the 90s, early 2000s, there was opportunities to do impressions where it's really direct to camera and monologuing.
But like, yeah, like this is like a Anna Gasteyer obviously went to a lot. Like I think like she always played these like very like calm, subdued, kind of like serious person, but like the comedy there, it's just like a type of comedy I really enjoy, I guess, is like that contrast of like what she says and what she means and how she's acting, right? So like whether it's St. Patrick's Day or Halloween or what have you, like how it's like kind of like shocking and crude, but like it just slides under because of the way she's delivering it. Like that's something she did very well with like a lot of her characters. And I really enjoyed this. And I also think like another thing that's like lost upon us now is that I feel like back then there were only like celebrities were more concentrated and like heavily weighted, right? Like now, like everyone's famous, like in some capacity, like, right? Like it's, you know, back then it was like her, Dr. Phil, like Oprah, you know, there was like 10 famous people, right? So like we forget now, like, and I'm exaggerating, but like 10, like super, like these like pop icons,
yeah,
in a way.
Exactly.
Yeah, like, you know, that everyone knew. Like my grandma knew Martha Stewart, right? Like, right, like anyone would know her. So I think like we forget now like how big of a deal Martha Stewart was. And like now I think we know of like a different Martha Stewart at like roasts, and like, you know, she served time, but like there was a time when there was also like this Martha Stewart. And or maybe like it overlapped now that I think about it. But I just think it's great. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, Martha Stewart, in my mind, in pop culture, has had such like different eras where, like, in this time when Anna's playing Martha Stewart, like she's known for like cooking and like what she puts together in the house, and everyone's like, oh, if Martha Stewart does that in her home, then that's what we should do in our home. And then like, you know, she like hosted The Apprentice, I think, at one point after Donald Trump. Then she and then she went to jail for a little bit, and then like now she's in her like roast / like best friends with Snoop Dogg era. Like it's so fascinating to get to see how she's like stayed in the culture. And yeah, I mean, like I almost like wish I got to see like Anna continue to play Martha Stewart like since 2004, because I just think there's like so much there to continue to go with. But Lewis, like, tell us everything about what you think of this impression.
I really enjoy it. It's another one that, like, again, I think it's a really good one that you don't need to know. I guess in America and North and Canada, it might not be. There's not many people that don't know who Martha Stewart is, but like, I think it's very good that like I could watch this not being too familiar with her and kind of finding it very funny. Anna Gasteyer absolutely nails Martha Stewart's flow here. The mannerism and like the way her talking goes, she's just got it on point. And it's very interesting watching like the an actual Martha Stewart clip and this one of these sketches back to back, because it sounds the exact same, but the words are obviously very different, being quite comedic and very, like Fred said, very grim, and that makes it really funny. And then switching to Martha Stewart actually just talking about how to make a sandwich, and it sounds the exact same. The mannerisms don't really change. And a weird comparison I find with this one, though, the way they did this sketch is to Kate McKinnon's, I can't remember the exact name of the sketch, but the cats one, where her and the host are like showing off their cats or whatever, and that they're being very calm and kind of like, woman kind of being, showing her wild side a little or whatever, but actually not being quite mild and being kind of subdued in their performance. It's a very good variety that SNL has, where they can do comedic, very chill moments, and then much bigger stuff like something like Matt Foley.
Yeah. I mean, there's been a lot of different versions of Martha Stewart's that have been played on Saturday Night Live, including Janine Garofalo did it, Nancy Walls, Amy Poehler, Rachel Dratch, David Spade once did it, Kristen Wiig, and then Kate McKinnon, as you mentioned. So lots of different versions, but the Anna Gasteyer impression is the number one. And it was really the Martha Stewart living sketches that we got to see different holiday versions. And I just want to talk about those sketches for a second, because I'm sure you guys got to watch a couple of them as you're preparing for discussing this impression. I find those sketches so fascinating to me, because it's really, like I said, it's monologuing, but what's so interesting is like Martha Stewart is being played as like the most monotone version, so boring and like nothing interesting, but the things that she's recommending for you to do at home are so like granular and like impossible for somebody to make on their own at home, that it's like the contrast of that is so interesting. And I think it's something that Anna Gasteyer is so good at. Like, think about the fact, like we talked about this in the character countdown, but they, her and Molly Shannon played the NPR ladies. It's almost like a little bit similar there, where they're so monotone, talking into the microphone, talking about the things that are not that interesting, but they make the sketch so interesting. I think it's something that Anna Gasteyer is maybe the best ever at the show at doing, is playing boring really well. And this is a great version of that. So Fred, what do you think of that?
Well, I just wonder, like, unfortunately, if like the show's gone in a direction where somebody good at that will not get screen time, or it's not valued. And it's natural that the show kind of grows in its own way. But I think now it'd be very tough for somebody who'd probably do a good job at it. Although I can't honestly think of, I mean, they're all very talented, so they could figure it out. But like Anna Gasteyer just also looks the part, which helps a little bit. But yeah, I agree with everything you're saying.
Lewis, any other thoughts on Anna Gasteyer's Martha Stewart impression? Anything you watched that you would recommend to the listeners to check out?
The Thanksgiving and Halloween one's really great. The one with the Thanksgiving one where they bring in Martha Stewart's mother was really great. I think Anna Gasteyer has that
Joan Allen.
skill. That's played by Joan Allen, yeah. The Martha Stewart has that really great skill where she can. It's a very difficult thing to stay so subdued when you're talking about this kind of ridiculous thing. It would be very easy to break out and start being a bit surreal and chaotic, but she kind of holds that down and really makes it a very focused and like an impression that knows what it is. In terms of if we could get that today, I think that's a really interesting question, because I touched on this last time I was here, but again, SNL is competing with stuff like TikTok for like young people's attentions nowadays, and young people's attention spans, I don't even know this, they're not great, which is a
Why don't you tell us,
terrifying which is a terrifying problem I see and experience every day. But it's something I find really enjoyable, but I don't know if the show would be as confident doing it.
And it's so like I feel like
out there.
I feel like the sets are so easy, and the sketches are short. Like I wish they would like take that risk again, right? Like something like somebody Chloe can do so incredibly well, super quick, in and out. Especially like if it comes to like a time budgeting thing. Like I know it doesn't quite work like that, but
yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, and I had to think like, a lot of people talked about the last couple of years of the potential of somebody like Anna Gasteyer hosting the show. We thought maybe we would get that this year instead of Molly Shannon. And I think that if Anna was to host the show, we would expect maybe to see a Martha Stewart sketch, because this is just so easy, right? It doesn't require any of the recurring characters to come on in. It's really easy to film. And yes, Martha Stewart is an impression that is, like held to that specific point in time, but it would be great to see how Anna's version of Martha holds up nowadays, knowing that Martha Stewart is still around and doing some stuff. So I would love to see, Martha Stewart Living's marijuana special, like that would be fun to get to see, because that would be a modern version of that. So it makes sense to me that this made the list. Not only is a good impression, but also Anna Gasteyer with American Auto being popular in the last couple of years, even though I don't believe it's renewed. With her being in the zeitgeist, I think that was boosted a little bit here. So anything else on impression number 18?
I just the shortness of it. It's very surreal to be seeing. Like, I think I first clicked on it, I was like, what? This sketch was only 2 minutes 30, and they consistently had this in the show. I think it would be really cool if they did that more nowadays. I understand why they might not, but I think that's really cool.
It's so pleasant to rewatch, right? Like, you're in and out. Like, you got your laughs, and then it's
for
done.
Sure. Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of like Norm Macdonald's Larry King, which was like so quick, in and out, and they would do these like quick versions of that. So I think they were more used to doing that type of stuff at the time, and it would be fun to get back to it. Okay. Number 17 on the list, the last impression that we are revealing tonight is a little bit more modern, but it's still a fun pop culture one. And this is number 17.
I just want to ask you one question. What's wrong with it? Huh?
What, with the handbag?
That's right.
It's the wrong color.
The wrong color. She says it's the wrong color.
Yeah, that is the amazing, incredible Jay Farrow playing Denzel Washington, who, this was a big breakout moment for Jay Farrow on the show when he got to play Denzel. I mean, we got to see him come on to the show and be himself on Weekend Update and do a bunch of impressions. And obviously this is he's one of the greatest impressionists in the history of the show, but I think his Denzel really clicked with people. And it wasn't done that many times on the show. It was only done 4 times between 2010 and 2012 officially, where he's actually playing Denzel in the sketch. But I just think this to me is such a great impression and so much fun. And that sketch in particular that I played was him as if he worked at a store and was going over this woman's handbag that she was returning. This is a fantastic characterization of an impression, and I love it. And Lewis, I'd love to know from you, what are your thoughts on Jay Farrow coming in here, number 17, with the Denzel impression?
I think it's a really good impression. It's a very good middle ground between a spot and impression and a characterization, because not only does he nail a lot of Denzel's mannerisms and speech patterns, but also the kind of characters he plays and how he plays them. I think Jay just gets down to a T. I believe Jay to be a very underrated SNL performer. He kind of got unlucky with his position leaving the show, but his impressions are just so good that they reflect his talent altogether. It's also really interesting that Returns and Exchange sketch, that was very early on in season 36, if I'm corrected.
Yeah, that was October 2010, so that would be season 36, episode 3. That was his third episode on the show, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good thing for a newcomer to have, is a very solid impression. I mean, we see it really nowadays with JJ getting that, and it's a very good thing to have because it is entertaining for us and also gives them a spotlight and starts getting them on the show right away. And I think I'm kind of glad they didn't overuse it, because Jay did get overused with some impressions a bit. Sometimes completely necessary. If you could do the president, having him do the president a lot is kind of an important thing. But yeah, I think it's a really good impression, and it gave us a lot of really great sketches.
Yeah, it's really fascinating of an impression. Fred, what do you think about it?
I mean, I agree. I love Jay Farrow, and I feel like watching him is a treat. Whenever you see him, it just puts a smile on my face. And yeah, to Lewis's point, this is a great middle ground. Although I feel like Martha Stewart's a middle ground too, but maybe not. It's just accurate in the writing, the word said is what's funny. But yeah, I agree with Lewis. This is a great middle ground of what we keep talking about what makes a good impression. I think obviously he's blowing up like the fun roles that Denzel plays. Like it's not Malcolm X Denzel. It's like Training Day Denzel, right? You know, like so like, you know, like he got to pick and choose, but it's incredible. Like the laugh, the clapping, like even like his facial expressions. Like he doesn't even like look like Denzel, but like that enough is like to make it like come to life. I think it's so funny. Like I really enjoy and then like there's a bias here. Like I love Taron Killam too, but like that sketch with like the train that's gonna crash. And like ScarJo's like with the New York accent, like the Chrysler Building thing, like the little buddy cop thing. Like it's just so much fun to watch. Like I am surprised it made the list though.
Okay,
I
why?
love the impression. Just like there's so many. There like you only get 20, right? Like I feel like I guess like I think if I asked most of my friends that do kind of watch SNL, like most of my friends don't really watch it all too much, they would never even think. If I locked them in a room, they may not think of this impression. Which is like, you know, that's not a good sample size. But like when I read it and when I rewatched it, I was like, yeah, like it's great.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We'll obviously analyze the entire list like once we reveal everything, but I think that, you know, a lot of the impressions that get on this list, and I think it's very different than the characters, which are more memorable in a way. Like you have to think about the impressions a lot more. And I think once you start thinking about impressions, you start thinking about the impressionness, and you're like, okay, Jay Farrow was such a great impression on the show. What do I remember? Like which impression do I remember of Jay Farrow's? And I think Denzel is maybe the first one that comes across that list. So then you get the votes in for him to come in here at number 17. Whereas I agree with you. I don't think that this, you know, if you think of the top 20 impressions in the history of the show, this may not necessarily be across your mind, but I just think that people love Jay Farrow. They consider him one of the greatest impressionists that the show has ever seen. And this was such a big moment for him at the beginning of his SNL career, and then just appeared a few times in sketches. And this is like, look, we talked about Jason Sudeikis' Joe Biden, which appeared 27 times on the show. I mean, this was only on 4 times, and it was so memorable that people still voted it in. So, Fred, was there another Jay Farrow impression that you may have put on this list? Or you think that this was the right one, at least for now?
Well, no, I would put this above everything else, but now I'm just like kind of like, you know.
That's fair. That's totally fair. Yeah. All right, Lewis, I mean, what about you? In your research of the impression, were there moments that you saw that really stood out to you?
Yeah, I think this is one of those impressions that just produced a lot of great sketches, like the Returns one, the Unstoppable one. There's a really great one, Give Us Back Our Daughters. That's just such a great sketch, and Jay's very good in it as Denzel. I think in regards to why this impression on there, I think something to take into consideration is like how has anyone else in like the history of the show done Denzel, or is it just Jay?
So Dean Edwards did Denzel Washington on a Weekend Update. I think that was with here, let me look. That was with Maya Rudolph's Halle Berry. So that was an Oscar thing back in 2002. Tim Meadows did Denzel once, but I mean, we're not talking about like very memorable moments, you know, in terms of like iconic moments with them playing Denzel. They only played them each once on the show. And I think that a factor here that's interesting, Lewis, is that Denzel Washington has never appeared as himself on the show. So that could be something here where it's like, you know, a little bit taste of Denzel on SNL.
Yeah,
well, he's never hosted or anything, huh?
Never.
Yeah, I think that mixed with there hasn't been many Denzels compared to like Joe Biden's and Martha Stewart's kind of might put it up when people think impressions. They think, oh, Denzel Washington. They'll think Jay Farrow. They'll think which Jay Farrow one did I really like? Denzel, because I think that it just shown really well. It's personally not even my top 3 Jay Farrow, just because he has so many great ones. I think like we might even see them on the list. Obama is just phenomenal. Right. Will Smith. There's Chris Rock, Tracy Smith. Morgan. He's got a lot of. I really like his Tracy Morgan. But he's got a lot of like really great impressions as well. He did. I was just watching Jimmy Kimmel. There's a John Mulaney. Never did that on the show, but he does a really weirdly great John Mulaney.
That's a good point. I do think his Will Smith is really excellent and probably would be the one that I would consider. He did that a couple times on Weekend Update. That's good. I have to wonder if the people being down on Will Smith in the last year or two from the slap incident maybe would boost the impression of Denzel a little bit more. And I just wonder if like the talk about Obama not being an exciting SNL impression on the show may have taken that one out of the mix, at least for now. So, I mean, we'll see if these pop up on the list later on. No spoilers, but I'm just saying, while we have the current version of the list, I think that there's reasons why the Denzel one is here for at least now. Cause I think like all of the presidents, and you would say like Jay's Obama is more iconic than Fred's Obama, naturally.
Fred's is terrible.
Right.
Or
but
whatever.
But there just wasn't too many memorable Jay Farrow Obama sketches. Whereas I just think, like I said, I think that if people are going to think about a great impressionist on the show and his best impression, it may be this one. All right. Well, that is it for tonight with number 20, 19, 18, and 17. So Fred, are you happy with the choices on the list so far?
I am. And this was a fun one to talk about. There were a few of them that I was excited to see for sure.
Yeah. Lewis, what about you?
If I am happy with them depends on what the rest of the list goes on to be. I think each of these definitely, I think, believe to be in the top 20. But if these are where I think they deserve to be, time will tell.
Okay. Well, it's gonna get more intense as we reveal everything week by week, and then we narrow down to the best impressions in the history of the show, or the top impressions in the history of the show. And next week we'll be back here at the same time to reveal 16, 15, 14, and 13. So 4 more impressions to reveal next week. So we'll have a good idea of almost half of the list as we start to reveal these week by week until we get the top 20 impressions in the history of Saturday Night Live. If you enjoyed the show, let us know. And if what you thought of these impressions, write your thoughts in the comments. I see so many great comments from other people in the chat, including many of our patrons. So happy to get to see what you think of the impressions that made the list. I think personally, this list is more interesting to me than the characters we did last year, which was very fun, but this could go a lot of different directions. So I'm very curious what people think about how this list ended up once that is all revealed. Fred, thanks for joining us tonight. Anywhere the listeners can check you out.
Here, there, everywhere. Thanks for having me.
Okay.
It was great to be here.
Yeah, always a pleasure to have you on the show. So thanks for joining us. And Lewis, what about you, buddy?
Thank you.
I'm at Function on Twitter. But thank you. I've had a great time. Really enjoyed talking about this.
Yeah, so much fun. And thanks again to all of our patrons who are participating in this series. Can't wait to talk to you all over the next few weeks. If you missed our point counterpoint last week that we did with Andrew, Dick, and TJ, those are always really crazy. So go back and check out that, as well as some other really fun content over the summer. Interviews with Heidi Gardner, Aristotle Atari, Connie Crawford from the Anyone Can Host competition. A lot of fun stuff. And then we have some great stuff planned for after this series as well. So thank you to Fred, Lewis, all the voters, and everybody in the chat for joining us on this Monday night. My name is Jon Schneider from the Saturday Night Network. We will see you next week, everybody. Have a good one.